You know, there's a whole Africa they never taught me about at school. The Africa I learned about was a place of struggle, of poverty, of waiting for the world to notice. But that's only a fraction of the truth. There's a deeper, richer story. One that's been hidden, overlooked, and sometimes deliberately erased. Forget the tired old stories of explorers and colonizers. I'm talking empires, innovation, and brilliance that shaped the world long before ships ever crossed the Atlantic. Africa's story isn't just about what happened after outsiders arrived. It's about what Africans built, discovered, and dreamed up for thousands of years before that. This is a continent where civilization didn't just exist, it thrived, and it led. Picture Nubia thriving on the banks of the Nile. This wasn't just a neighbor to Egypt, it was a rival, a partner, and sometimes a conqueror. Nubia's kingdoms rose and fell with the river, their stories etched into the stones and sands. Kushite pharaohs, not Egyptian shadows, ruling both Egypt and their homeland, building pyramids that still stand in Sudan's deserts, more of them than in Egypt itself. These pyramids are smaller, but they're just as grand, and they tell a story of power, faith, and ambition. The Kushites weren't imitators, they were innovators, blending African and Egyptian traditions into something new. These were ironworkers, traders, and kings whose names history books barely whisper. Why is that? Why do we know so little about the people who forged iron tools and weapons centuries before much of Europe? Why are their markets, their art, their inventions so often left out of the story? Let's leap east to Ethiopia. Here in the highlands, a civilization flourished that would leave its mark on the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. The Axumite Empire once carved 100-ton obelisks out of solid rock without machines. These monuments still stand, silent witnesses to a time when Axum was a superpower, its influence stretching across the Red Sea and deep into Arabia. This was one of the world's first Christian kingdoms, trading gold and spices, mentioned by Roman writers alongside Rome, Persia, and China. Axum's coins traveled far, stamped with crosses and kings, proof of a kingdom that saw itself as equal to the greatest empires of its day. If Axum was that important, why isn't it in every world history class? Why do we learn about Rome and Greece, but not about the African empires that traded with them, fought them, and sometimes outlasted them? Now West Africa, Mali, a land of rivers, gold, and stories that echo across the centuries. Under Mansa Musa, gold flowed so freely, his pilgrimage to Mecca crashed economies. Imagine a king so wealthy that his generosity could change the price of gold across continents. Mansa Musa's journey wasn't just about wealth, it was about showing the world the power and culture of Mali. But it wasn't just about riches. Mali was a center of learning, music, and faith. Its cities buzzed with scholars, poets, and travelers from across Africa and beyond. In Timbuktu, scholars studied astronomy, law, and poetry, thousands of manuscripts still waiting to rewrite what we think we know. These texts, written in Arabic and African languages, hold secrets about science, philosophy, and history that challenge everything we thought we knew about Africa's past. Africa was writing its own story, centuries before Europe brought civilization. Under the shade of baobab trees, elders passed down wisdom, history, and law, not just through books, but through stories, songs, and memory. Across the Sahara, camel caravans stretched for miles. These weren't just traders, they were the lifeblood of a continent, carrying salt, gold, ideas, and culture from one end of Africa to the other. On the Swahili coast, dhows sailed to Arabia, Persia, India, and China. The Indian Ocean was a highway, not a barrier, and African sailors mastered its winds and currents long before European explorers set sail. Africa wasn't isolated, it was at the very heart of global trade. Spices, ivory, gold, and even ideas flowed in and out, connecting Africa to the world in ways that textbooks rarely mention. And when it came to defense, African societies developed strategies, weapons, and fortifications that rivaled anything in Europe or Asia. Shaka Zulu's tactics reshaped warfare. He revolutionized the battlefield with new formations and weapons, turning the Zulu into a force that could stand against any invader. The Ashanti built disciplined armies. Their organization, their courage, and their technology made them a power in West Africa, able to resist colonization for generations. Menelik II of Ethiopia, he shattered an invading Italian army at Adwa in a victory so decisive it made empires tremble. Ethiopia's triumph wasn't just a military feat, it was a symbol of African resistance and pride, a moment when the world had to reckon with Africa's strength. Why isn't ADWA taught as one of history's greatest battles? Why do we celebrate other victories, but not the ones that changed the fate of a continent? Africa built knowledge too. Its libraries, universities, and schools were centers of learning, attracting students from across the world. The Nok people smelted iron 1,000 years before Christ. Their art, their technology, and their culture laid the groundwork for civilizations that would follow. Great Zimbabwe's stone cities stand without mortar. Farmers engineered the land. These were not primitive societies. They were architects, engineers, and visionaries, building cities that still inspire awe today. Doctors in Timbuktu studied surgery and astronomy centuries ahead of Europe's Renaissance. They mapped the stars, treated disease, and wrote books that would one day influence the world. So why does Africa's story so often start with slavery? Why do we begin with chains when there were crowns, libraries, and cities long before? Because empire didn't just conquer land, it conquered memory. It rewrote the past, erasing the achievements of Africa's people and replacing them with stories of darkness and despair. But no truth stays buried forever. Every day, archaeologists, historians, and ordinary people are uncovering the real story, piece by piece, artifact by artifact. The ruins, the manuscripts, the songs, they're still here. They survived centuries of silence, waiting for us to listen, to learn, and to remember. Africa's children are remembering, reclaiming the story of kingdoms, trade, and invention. They're learning that their ancestors were builders, thinkers, and leaders, and that their future can be just as bright. When we finally see Africa as the foundation of civilization, history itself will change. The world's story will be richer, more honest, and more complete. Africa was never the dark continent. It was a continent of light, of knowledge, of power, and possibility. It was always the original light, and that light is rising again. The world is finally ready to see Africa for what it truly is, the birthplace of greatness and the heart of humanity's story.